Well, good evening once again. You can go ahead and be opening your Bibles to 2 Timothy if you want to. We'll look at a verse there in just a minute. One of the things that I didn't announce at the beginning, wanted to save this good news for right now. This afternoon, after our mentee social, one of our young people decided to put on Christ in baptism. Brother Wayman Story was baptized into Christ this afternoon, and one of the things that's really cool about that picture is seeing some of our really little guys there trying to see what it's all about. So be sure to congratulate Wayman and encourage him in his new walk when you see him. He'll be hard to miss because he's about 6'8", and so you'll recognize Wayman. Thank you for putting that up. I had already planned on tonight talking about the topic of mentoring, and in conjunction with our new program that's going on that began today and with the social, I just thought it would be appropriate. But you know, yesterday I lost someone who was a good friend and kind of a mentor. I posted on Facebook this afternoon about Brother Will Mayhew, and just a guy, you can go and read it later, but just generous and loving and hilarious and talented and just gone way too soon. And it was sort of bittersweet, I guess, because I'm going to stand up here tonight and talk about mentoring, and then to have such a perfect example of it leave this world, I think is a reminder to all of us about why it's important to take advantage of relationships that we have with people while we still have them. And this evening, we're going to talk about mentoring and some of the importance of it. And I hope that we will not just see this as another work or another program, but that we'll really take advantage of these relationships. Because as we go back and look over the membership rolls of the church from last year, and the year before, the list of people that are no longer with us continues to grow. And so we need to take advantage of those relationships while we have the opportunity. And I hope that we'll do that tonight. I'm going to lean heavily on some research that was done by the folks at Lifeway in this lesson tonight. Lifeway is really the biggest Christian retailer. If you go into Lifeway, they have Bibles and books and materials, and they've really commercialized those things. And on one hand, it's a great resource and a great place to go and buy Bibles and things. On the other hand, it's not exactly where you would go for religious instruction. But one thing that they really do a great job at is providing research. And so I'm going to lean heavily on a lot of their research in this discussion tonight, lest you think that I went and compiled all this myself. But their initial research about mentoring, I believe this was done in 2014, they surveyed young adults, and this is probably my age range and younger, these people in their 20s and 30s, and maybe even some teenagers included in this, about how they felt about relationships with older people. And of the unchurched young adults they surveyed, 45% said that they thought the opportunity to receive advice from people with similar life experiences is very important. So 45% of people who do not attend any sort of church service said that they thought it was important to receive advice from people that had been through what they are going to go through. And among churched young adults, that number rose to 68%. So I think that before we even get into the body of this discussion, we have to get rid of this preconception that younger people do not want a relationship with older people. Because I think the common thinking has always been, well, you know, younger people are living in a world that's so much different than older generations that they don't want to live in that. You know, in a lot of ways, young people can do things with technology and all, and that older people have no idea how to do and participate in. And life was so different for you than it is for them that there's just nothing that you have to offer each other. And I think that's where a lot of the generation gap in churches has come from. We'll say, well, there's no reason why anybody on this side of the building would want to have a relationship with anybody on this side. But the research, the empirical data shows that that's just not true. That as a matter of fact, our younger people, and especially our younger adults, crave that wisdom that older adults have to offer. And I'll tell you, I'm one of those. I was talking with somebody the other day about the work here and when I moved and all that. And they asked, well, did you immediately fall into relationships with the young adults? And the truth is that part took a while. But the people that I got closest to when I first moved to LJ were all people that were 75 and older. And that's sort of funny, but it is. The group that I immediately felt the most comfortable with and the group that embraced me the most and spent the most time with me and were all people that are 70 and 75 and older. And that's families like the Whites and the Holloways and the Bohannons and the Kingsleys and Miss Sybil and people like that. I could go down the list who just made me feel so welcome and so much a part of this family. Excuse me. And when I talk to them, and by the way, I can't leave the Farrells out because that peach cobbler was pretty good when we first moved here too. I can't forget about that. But I didn't feel out of place talking to them. Yeah, they grew up watching black and white television, but I mean, things, it's actually fascinating and interesting to go back and see the differences in how you grew up and what those things were like. And so I want us to just remove that bias from our head as we get into this discussion that said, well, young people want nothing to do with older people and vice versa. It's simply not true. And if we were really honest, I think we would say that we strongly desire wisdom from those people who have been through life experiences. And so I want us to go into this discussion and into this program that our youth deacons have set up with that open mind and with that mindset. So it was brought up in a discussion about this that the word mentor is not used anywhere in the Bible. And that's true. But our passage in 2 Timothy chapter 2, this says this. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2. And remember, this is Paul, the mentor, writing to his mentee, Timothy, as he's preparing to die and leave this world. And this is what he says in chapter 2, verse 1. He says, you therefore, my son. Notice the language there. He doesn't say you preacher, you Christian. He says, you my son. And of course, he's not his real son. He's using that phrase to mean a son in the faith. But he says, you my son, be strong in the grace that is in Christ Jesus. In the things you have heard from me among many witnesses, commit these to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. He says, Timothy, I've mentored you. I've brought you along. You take those things, that wisdom, that teaching, and it's your job to impart that down the line. And these are just a few biblical examples that we can think of. Jethro mentored Moses. Then Moses mentored Joshua and the elders of Israel. Joshua mentored the other remaining leaders of his army. As the nation was born, we see the continued line of mentoring that went on there. Eli mentored Samuel. Samuel mentored Saul and David. Elijah was a mentor to Elisha. This is one that I'd never thought about until I looked at it. Daniel was a mentor to King Nebuchadnezzar. And that's sort of strange to think about, that Nebuchadnezzar's this great big king of Babylon, yet it was Daniel who mentored him, and through Daniel's mentorship, Nebuchadnezzar proclaimed the praises of the Almighty God. That's interesting. Mordecai mentored Esther. Esther then mentored her husband, King Artaxerxes, which led to the liberation of God's people. Priscilla and Aquila served as mentors to the young preacher Apollos. And then finally, probably the clearest example to us, Jesus mentored the 12 apostles, those including, and then Paul, of course, he was mentored by, or Jesus mentored Paul indirectly. Paul mentored Titus, Timothy, and others. Timothy mentored faithful men. Those other faithful men continued to do that. And that mentoring on down the line has eventually led us where? To where we are right here. And our elders, not just the elders that hold the office of elder, but those of you that are in that elderly time of your life should be mentoring the next generation, who should be mentoring the next generation and on down the line. And that's the purpose of it. These are just a few verses that deal with mentoring, and you can jot these down. We won't have time to turn to every one of them. But the Proverbs are full of advice about mentoring. You probably know this one, Proverbs 27:17. Iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. Titus chapter 2, verse 3 talks about older women teaching younger women. Psalm 71:18, even when I am old and gray, God, do not forsake me until I declare your strength to this generation and your power to all who are to come. That's an important one, Psalm 71:18. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 9, give instruction to a wise man and he will still be wiser. Teach a righteous man and he will increase his learning. Proverbs 1:5, a wise man will hear an increase in learning. A man of understanding will acquire wise counsel. We could go down the line. Proverbs 13:20, he who walks with wise men will be wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. And then finally, Hebrews 13:7, remember those who led you, who spoke the word of God to you, and consider the result of their conduct, imitate their faith. And that's just a few examples of many that talk about following the example of other faithful Christians. And so here's some practical things. So we realize that younger people and older people are meant to mentor each other. We realize that the Bible has given us countless verses that instruct us to seek out a mentor. So for the last two things, as we're here together tonight, we're going to see, number one, what to look for in a mentor. If I'm looking for somebody to pattern myself after, what do I want to look for? That's going to be the first thing. And the second thing is going to look at the ultimate purposes of that kind of relationship. So you may want to jot these down. I thought these were fascinating. So you're searching for your ideal mentor. I look around this building. There are a lot of old people, right? Some of you thought that was funny. Some of you not so much. You've got people, and I hope this doesn't embarrass anybody. Who in here is over 80 years old? Over 80 years old. 1, 2, 3, 4. You are not Miss Alice. Quit lying. 80 years old. There's a lot of wisdom in those years. There's a lot of things that have been forgotten probably too, but there's a lot of wisdom in those years. What about over 75? Raise your hand if you're over 75. Look at that. What about just over 70? Over 70. What about just over 65? There's a lot of wisdom in those years. There are a lot of people who have completed careers, who have raised families, and in some cases, second families as they've raised grandchildren. There's a lot of wisdom there. Now raise your hand if you're under 25. Under 25. Barry, put your hand down. Most of you under 25, you can put your hands down, have not started a family yet. And so there has to be that relationship and those things that are there. So if I'm looking for a mentor, here's the first thing. The ideal mentor is someone who's honest with you. Someone who's honest with you. Somebody walked in tonight, I won't mention a name, a person, and I said, I just want you to know that I think you're cute and adorable, but you look like an absolute hot mess tonight. Sometimes we have to be honest with each other, don't we, Brittany? Sometimes we have to be frank with each other, and jokingly and picking on it, but we have to be honest, right? If I don't do something well, there's no use in telling me that I do it well because I'll never learn from that behavior. And so I think that's the first thing. Whether it's somebody in a family, a friend, we've got to be honest with each other if we want the mentoring relationship to work. Secondly, it needs to be somebody who can be a good role model. Can be a good role model. I need to pick someone who has had success in an area where I'm striving to have success. And so that's the second thing. The third thing, and this might be the most important one, we have to find somebody who is deeply committed to us. Who is deeply committed to us. I felt kind of bad this afternoon because we had to sort of rush out of that social, and I had a quick Bible study with Wayman, and I came over to the baptism, and my mentee, who is Charlie Barr, came up to me and he said, why didn't we sit, and there was a paper that you had to fill out. Why didn't you help me fill out my paper? And that makes me feel bad. Certainly there was a good reason not to, but there has to be that commitment there. If you signed up to be a part of this mentoring program, please do it. Don't let your mentee be the one kid who doesn't have that commitment to them. If you signed up to be a part of it, participate. We have to be committed or that relationship will never work. Number 4, we've got to be open and transparent. Open and transparent. Let's not pretend to be things that we're not. We need to be honest if we're going to mentor someone and talk about the mistakes that we've made. I'm not being honest if I say, yeah, I was perfect all the way. I'm 32, about to be 33, and I've never made a mistake. Well, that's not true, and nobody learns anything from that. So there needs to be transparency and openness. Number 5, as a mentor, we've got to be willing to be a teacher. Got to be willing to be a teacher. Does that mean you have to stand up and teach an auditorium class? No, I'm not saying that. But there has to be, that willingness to teach, to impart information. Number 6, your mentor needs to be somebody who believes in your potential. Needs to be somebody who believes in your potential. If I'm mentoring one of our young men and I'm training him to be a song leader and he can't carry a tune in the bucket, then that's probably time to switch that mentoring to somebody else, right? Not everybody's meant to be a song leader or whatever it is. Has to be somebody who believes in your potential. Number 7, it needs to be somebody who can help you define and achieve your goals. Define and achieve your goals. I'm always amazed by high school guidance counselors and college advisors, right? Because most of the time, I would think, when our kids are juniors and seniors in high school, they have no idea what they want to do with their life. And so they go into the guidance counselor's office and they try to figure out what their aptitude is or what they might be successful at or what their passion might be, and you've got to try to do that. And then when you get to college, the majority of freshmen in college have no idea what their major is going to be. And so that advisor has to sit them down and try to help them define what their career path is going to be so they can set them on the right track to take the proper classes. That takes a lot of work. And do you know what happens in college most of the time? Most kids switch their major at some point. That's why those of you that have kids in college might as well get used to being broke, because they're going to change their major 3 or 4 times, and they may change schools, and they may change what they want to do. And so we have to, when we're mentoring people, help people define their goals so they can have something that they're willing to achieve. Number 8, we have to, as a mentor, we have to find someone that we think has been successful. Find someone that we think has been successful. When I was looking for mentors in my preaching career, and I don't mean this to be ugly, I didn't set my eyes on people that had preached at 15 different churches and been through 10 church splits and caused all kinds of problems. Those are not people that I sought out as mentors. That doesn't mean they weren't wonderful people. That doesn't mean they weren't God-fearing men. What it means is if I'm going to try to be successful in my career as a minister, I need to find mentors that had also shared similar success. And don't you think that's a fair ask when we're looking for mentors? I think that's what we have to remember. Number 9, if I want to find a mentor, it needs to be somebody that's also willing to learn from me. This mentoring relationship that we're going to have in the church with older members and younger kids, I promise you those kids can teach you things. The only reason that I know how to work my cell phone is because of kids in our youth group. Snapchat does all these updates all the time, and I have no idea what to do with it. And I have to go and ask our kids, hey, how does this work? What do you do? And so we have to be able to figure that out and to do it. And not just that, but life lessons. We can learn from young people as well. And then finally, number 10, we need to find a mentor who's willing to stay on our primary agenda. There are a lot of very well-meaning people in the world who cannot be our mentors because they're not willing to focus on our needs ahead of their own. And I know that's a long list and sort of a lot to take in, but when we're searching for a mentor, we need to find somebody who meets some of those qualifications. And here's what we're going to get to close out. What's the point? What's the point? Why am I spending my time worried about finding older people to mentor me and trying to share knowledge with other people? What's the point? And I think there's 3 of them, and I do want you to write these down. Number 1, we serve as mentors to build relationships. To build relationships. No church can be effective in its work if the generations don't get along and communicate. There are churches this very day, and not just denominational churches, churches that wear the name Church of Christ who met one group at 8:30 or 9 o'clock for a traditional service, and the other group met at 10:30 or 11 o'clock for a contemporary service. Why? Do you mean that we can't come together on our stylistic preferences to worship God and we're supposed to claim to be part of the same congregation? And I think that sometimes we look at that and say, well, churches grow and look, they're having two separate services. No, what you have there is two separate churches. And so what we need to do is try to build those relationships where not only do we desire the same things in the work of the church and in the worship of the church, but where we find joy in doing those things together. We have a congregational holiday party on Friday night. It's not for the youth. It's not for our seniors. It's for all of us to come together and participate in that. And there needs to be those kinds of activities so that we can continue to build those relationships so that we don't have a segmented block of members of our church, but we have one church. And Paul, when he wrote to the Ephesians, do you remember what he said? That it's about every joint working together to help the church fulfill its purposes. So the first thing, we've got to build a mentor because we want to continue to build those relationships. Secondly, we mentor so that we can strengthen each other as individuals. Strengthen each other as individuals. Right now, there are people in this building who are struggling with their faith mightily. Struggling mightily. They might be sitting right next to you. They might be sitting on the opposite side of the building. They might be there with a smile on their face. But there are people right now who are struggling and they don't know where to go because they don't have relationships with us in the way that they should to be able to confide in us. One of the mentoring things is we look around, and if I have somebody to turn to in my time of need and in my time of crisis, I go and they can help build me individually. That's the plea that we see when Paul wrote to the churches of Galatia, isn't it? Bear one another's burden, so fulfill the law of Christ. You who are spiritual, restore such a one. We're doing that so that we can individually strengthen members of the church. It's not just about mutual edification all the time. Sometimes there's somebody that needs a hand to be picked up, and that's the reason that we have those reciprocal relationships. So number one, we mentor to build relationships. Number two, we mentor to build up individuals. And thirdly, we mentor, and this is so important, we mentor so we can build the future of the church. I said in our lesson this morning that the numbers tell us that churches across the world are shrinking week by week. There was an issue of the Gospel Advocate, I don't remember, it's been 2 or 3 months ago, that talked about that. How many, or maybe it was the Christian Chronicle, it was one of those publications that had the numbers of how many churches are closing down every week. How many churches are under a certain number. We as a church here at LJ with our 250 to 300 members are in the larger chunk of churches of Christ. There are in pockets of the country, large congregations, don't get me wrong, but those numbers are going down. And there are churches all over who the reason that is happening is because they have failed to build mentoring relationships and they have failed to adapt to the needs of a changing generation. If a church has one song leader that leads singing until the day he dies, there's been nobody else trained to take his place. If there's one preacher that has never trained anybody else or taught them about preaching, and when he leaves this world, he hasn't left that skill or trade to anybody else. The same thing is true of elders and of deacons and of Bible class teachers and all of those roles that it needs and that we need to fulfill in a church. And that's why it's happening. We failed to teach and we failed to adapt to the needs of changing generations. Mentoring can be the very thing that saves a church from extinction. And I don't mean the church, because the Bible tells us that the church will endure forever. But I mean that it can be the thing that saves a congregation. That's why we're taking 10 minutes on Sunday night for these young people to sit right up here and learn the 10 Commandments that Daniel was talking to them about tonight. It's why on our fourth Sunday night at the beginning, we let any of these young men that want to get up here and lead a song. Because the future of the church depends upon that. Mentoring is not just something that we do because it's a good program. It literally can be the cause of survival of the church. And so I ask this question as we close. What are we doing to provide that leadership and that guidance to the next generation? I'm so thankful, and thank you guys for putting together this mentoring program. I'm so excited about it, and I know it's something that Lads to Leaders has been doing for the last few years, and it's great. It's a wonderful thing. But don't just sign up and not do it, participate. And even if you're not involved in the program, take somebody, maybe it won't be a kid, but a young adult, take them and mentor them. When you see somebody struggling, take them under your wing and search for that. That's what Paul did. That's what Barnabas did. I don't know if you know this or not, but in Bible times, if you see the phrase B-A-R on somebody's name, that's not actually their name. Barabbas was not really named Barabbas. Bar-Jonah that we read about, Bar-Jesus, Bartimaeus. That phrase bar means son of. So when we read the name Barnabas in the Bible, that's not really his name. That's a nickname that was given to him. Bar means son of, and the rest of his name means encouragement. He was such a positive person. He was such a role model. He was such an influence that they literally changed his name, and they just called him Barnabas, the son of encouragement. What if we had to come up with a nickname for us tonight? That'd be a lot of fun, first off, to come up with nicknames for all of you. Some of you probably already have nicknames for me. That's okay. Are you an encourager? Are you a mentor? Are you doing something? We talked about this morning the result of doing nothing. What are we doing? Mentoring is so important. And as I mentioned at the outset, it becomes increasingly more important when you lose someone who has served as a mentor in your life. And here's what I've learned and been reminded of this weekend. We're never guaranteed tomorrow. I was talking with somebody yesterday, and I said, I get up every Sunday and I offer an invitation, and I say, you never know when your time's going to come, and then when someone that you're not expecting to die passes away, we're taken aback and we're still shocked by it. Here's the reality. Our time could come any second. Whether you're one of those people that raise their hand that's in their 80s or their 70s, whether you're one of those people that's under 25. Are we ready? I don't know if you saw this. This was in the news. There was a preacher in a church in Memphis, Tennessee that entered his pulpit last Sunday through the rafters on a harness. Did anybody see this on the news? And he was coming down and he said, this is what it's going to be like. Are you ready to meet the Lord? I don't think the Lord's coming through on a harness, but it's a good question. Are you ready to meet the Lord? If the answer is no, this is an opportunity to change that tonight. If you need to respond to the invitation in any way, come as we stand and as we sing.